The Silent Miracle. The story of Blessed Benedetta Bianchi. Porro, a heart that heard God when the world faded. Sometimes, God speaks the loudest when everything else goes silent. Tonight, I want to tell you the story of a young woman whose world slowly faded into darkness and silence. And yet, her soul grew brighter than ever. A woman who lost her hearing, her sight, her mobility, almost everything, except one thing, her ability to love. This is the story of Blessed Benedetta Bianchi Porro, a testimony that even when life takes away our strengths, God can turn our weakness into a light that reaches the whole world. Take a deep breath, and let's step quietly into her world. Benedetta was born in Italy in 1936, the second of 6 children. Her family remembered her as a gentle, thoughtful child, never loud, never demanding attention, but always noticing the small things. Even as a young girl, she carried a kind of quiet wisdom. But when she was still very young, her parents began to notice something strange. Benedetta walked with a slight limp. She stumbled more often than other children. Doctors brushed it aside at first, perhaps a passing condition. But as the months passed, the signs worsened. Her hearing began to fade. Her balance weakened. Something unseen was slowly draining her world away. By her teenage years, she was diagnosed with a rare neurological disease causing progressive deafness, paralysis, and blindness. It was incurable. Most people would be crushed by such a diagnosis. But Benedetta, she didn't collapse into despair. She chose something astonishing. She chose to love even more deeply. When she could no longer hear well, she learned to read lips. When she could no longer walk steadily, she studied harder. When she lost much of her hearing completely, she plunged into medical school with fierce determination, hoping to become a doctor to serve the suffering. Imagine that for a moment. A young woman, almost deaf, wanting to dedicate her life to healing others. But her disease continued its relentless progress. She fought it, bravely, gracefully, but eventually the day came when she could no longer continue her studies. Her dreams slipped away from her hands, one by one. Yet her faith remained unshaken. Those who met her in those years said she radiated peace. People came to her room just to sit with her, because somehow, even though she barely spoke, barely heard, barely saw, she made everyone feel understood and loved. By her 20s, Benedetta was almost fully blind and completely deaf. Her body was failing, but her soul was wide awake. She communicated through a small system. A visitor would trace letters gently into her palm, and she would respond by writing slowly on a little board. It was a fragile, delicate form of communication, but through it, Benedetta touched hundreds of hearts. Visitors left her bedside in tears, not because they pitied her, but because they felt they had met someone incredibly close to God. And then something even more extraordinary happened. Letters began arriving from all over Italy, people asking for her prayers, seeking her advice, longing for her serenity. Priests visited her not to counsel her, but because they felt spiritually strengthened in her presence. She was not a preacher. She did not give long speeches. She did not travel or speak at conferences or write best-selling books. She simply loved, quietly, consistently, heroically. And that was enough to change lives. In the final months of her life, darkness closed in almost completely. She could not move on her own. She lived in silence. She saw almost nothing. She breathed with difficulty, but something burned brightly within her. A deep awareness that her suffering, united with Christ's, was not meaningless. She once said through letters traced on her hand, "I am happy because I know that God loves me, and I know that my suffering is a gift I can offer back to Him." A gift. She called her suffering a gift. On January 23rd, 1964, at just 27 years old, Benedetta's earthly journey ended. Those present said that her face, in the moment of death, seemed peaceful, almost luminous, and today the Church venerates her as blessed, a witness that holiness is possible even when life becomes unbearably heavy or painfully silent. Benedetta's life confronts us with a question we rarely ask. What remains when everything else is taken away? She lost her hearing, yet she learned to listen with her heart. She lost her sight, yet she saw God's presence more clearly than most. She lost her physical strength, yet her soul grew unimaginably strong. She lost her dreams, yet she discovered a deeper calling, to become a quiet sanctuary where others found peace. Her story is not simply about suffering. It's about what suffering can become when placed in God's hands. We live in a world that fears weakness. We avoid discomfort. We hide our pain. But Benedetta shows that God often builds His greatest masterpieces in the silence of brokenness. Holiness does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it simply is. Her life reminds us that you don't need a perfect body to love perfectly. You don't need a strong voice to speak to hearts. You don't need great achievements to change the world. You don't need visibility to shine. You only need a willing heart. And Benedetta's heart, though held in a fragile, failing body, was overflowing with God. Maybe tonight, as you listen to this story, you're carrying your own kind of silence. A silence of disappointment, a silence of loneliness, a silence of prayers that seem unanswered, a silence where you wonder if God still sees you. Benedetta's life tells you gently, you are never abandoned. Even in the silence, God is near. Even when dreams slip away, His plan remains. Even when the world grows dark, His light can rise inside you. And maybe, just maybe, your greatest witness will come not from what you achieve, but from how you love in the middle of your struggle. Tonight, let Benedetta's quiet courage whisper to you, you are not alone. Your suffering has value, and if you let Him, God can make something beautiful out of your pain. So hold on, take one more step, offer your heart to Him again, and let His light shine through your weakness, just as it did through hers.